So Eric says, Bill, is it just me or has the cultural left given up on smearing baby it's cold outside, or am I just speaking too soon this early in the season? I don't know if they've given up on smearing it, Eric, but I will tell you one thing, and I've had this conversation with a number of people, and I feel more strongly about this every day. The left probably has not given up with smearing baby it's cold outside, but the population has had enough of the left smearing it. The population's had enough of this. Everywhere I look, I see people just now. They're just like at the end. That's enough. I've had enough. Anybody who thinks that baby it's cold outside is designed by the patriarchy to keep women out of executive offices needs to have their head examined. And furthermore, people are just getting sick of it. I mean, this is the problem when you run on outrage. When you run out of natural outrage, you have to run on synthetic outrage. And when those supplies run low, you have to make outrage out of ever more scarce materials, and the quality of the outrage is just weaker and weaker and weaker. And so now they're going to be outraged about this. And now we're at a point where, when they were talking about like mercury poisoning, most people, virtually all people, oh, that's good. I'm on their side with this. And then they talk about some other things. And then the whole, well, certainly gay rights there, people, absolutely, yeah, okay. And then the transgender thing kind of, but they've just saturated. It's saturated. They've had enough of it. I think now all I want them to do is to complain about all of this stuff. And I want them to get more and more lathered up about tinier and tinier things, because nobody makes the case for conservatism like progressives. Nobody. That's interesting. Ellen's theory of compensatory misery. I like the sound of that. I'm not going to read the whole thing now. I'm just going to get it there so it's up. Ellen. He's got a lot of theories, by the way. Ellen's theory of compensatory misery. You know why Google got to be Google? Why they got to be who they are? They got to be who they are because the guys who started Google figured out that I meant Ellen, even though I only spelled it with one L. That was the first people to really get fuzzy logic. First time a computer could say, because you always used to have to get it right. If you didn't get it exactly to the letter, then the computer doesn't know what to search for. They're stupid. And now it's, did you mean this? As a matter of fact, I did. I remember when that started, I thought that's really cool. So anyway, I'll look at this. This is cool. As human society gradually evolves, the problem of basic survival life. Yeah. Basically, it's this whole kind of people are built to worry and complain, and if you don't have real things to worry and complain, then you will worry and complain about other things. Yeah, it looks good. I'll read the rest of it, but it's clear, and they're mentally diseased, and I think most people are figuring that out now. Okay, we go back to debaterbittle.com, and then we'll do two more here. I got to get Texican because I don't want. Guys, so many questions from A. There's our pal Wesley Bruce. Hey Wes, I just want to get Texican because I don't want to have. Was it Mike? Chris, I think. I don't know. I'm trying. Somebody tell me, Chris Goodwin. I'm gonna guess that's it. Is that you, Chris? I'm going with Chris Goodwin. Here we go. Brace yourself, Chris. Here it comes. I'm going to give it to you full throttle here. Excuse me, I just want to. Okay, we got to do this right. What is the second most free country in the world? We all consider America to be the most free nation on earth, at least for now. But does anyone come close to our freedom in the U.S.? Thank you. Thank you very much. No, they don't, actually. you're tempted to think of it, and you watch, constantly hearing America used to be number one in economic freedom, then we're 17th, and now we're back up to 6 or something like that. And standards falling everywhere, and then you hear that this culture is happier, and the more people, all these things that used to be like so pro-American, like, oh, the happiest, richest nation, we're not the richest nation, we're the poorest nation, and on and on and on and on and on you go. But nobody else has these freedoms. And I'll tell you what the clearest example of this is. The only people who could approach the U.S. for freedom would be Western Europeans, and possibly, as Eric Blake points out, Singapore. No, I don't think so. I think it'd have to be a Western European country to get even close to it in terms of day-to-day life. But time and time and time again, I see Western intellectuals from Great Britain or Germany or conservatives. I didn't mean to say intellectuals. I beg your pardon, Pat. But they constantly saying, I can be arrested for saying this. I can go to jail for saying this. I can't say that I think Muslim immigration is bad for the country, because if I say that, I'll go to jail. And I thought, wow. I just, you just take it for granted. It's like, yeah, and they'll come right out and tell you. They'll come right out and tell you. They'll say, the reason you can get away with that in America is because you have a First Amendment. It's the First Amendment. And even the progressives are well, I was going to say even the progressives are bound to respect that, but that's under attack too. Anyway, yeah, so nobody's close. I couldn't pick a second because everything else is just kind of equally unfree. It's the Bill of Rights. And the whole discussion about whether or not they should have listed the items in the Bill of Rights, and so on. I've heard the argument that they should not have listed the Bill of Rights. The people who were against the Bill of Rights at the time said if you list the things that that the government's not allowed to do, they'll assume that everything else they can do. So I was having a discussion with my beautiful wife just 2 nights ago, these 2 nights ago, and we were talking about, what was it? I know what we were talking about. I'm trying to remember what it was in. We watched The Irishman on Netflix, and there's lots and lots of cases in The Irishman where these obvious gangsters are out on trial or in various inquiries or congressional investigations or whatever, and we got to the whole thing about I respectfully invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege. And I had to explain to Natasha what that was. I said, you're not, in America, you can't be forced to testify against yourself. And she looked at this, she looked at these gangsters just obviously guilty. She started laughing. She said, that's for children. It's for children. Kind of knocked me off my balance there for a second. And then I had to explain to her, it's like, and this is not something I ever really fully thought about before. Obviously, when you hear Nancy Pelosi or Hillary Clinton say, I don't recall, you ask 100 questions, and 93 of them are, I don't recall. In the Irishman, there's a scene where they're questioning a mobster, and he keeps saying, take the fifth, on the advice of my attorney, and finally the prosecutor holds up this black pen. He says, Mr. Mattinelli, what color is this pen? And the guy says, on advice of my attorney, I respectfully, and so the guy just throws up his hands and walks away. And Natasha said that's just an obvious indication that you're guilty. The fact that you're standing on this like legal principle is an indication that you're guilty. You might as well just say I'm guilty. And I thought about this for a while, and then I realized, no, it's actually much more important than that, much deeper than that. Because you cannot incriminate yourself, you have put a barrier between yourself and the state. Rather, I should say, the Constitution is written so that the natural barrier between you and the state remains there and is not removed by the government. I said, you can't beat a confession out of people. You can't force a confession out of people. And yes, you end up with situations like this that are just laughable when clearly the person knows what he's doing. Clearly they know. The lowest learner thing. Did you send this email? I don't recall. Did you go looking for it? Yes, we did. Did they find it? I'm not sure. It was not backed up. The computers were all off. I don't recall. Come on. We know you're guilty, but that's not the point. That's not the point. The point is that protection is more important than whatever crime that guy might have committed, including murder. In other words, the protection of the individual in the Fifth Amendment that says that, no, you can't coerce me to say something I don't want to say. You can't coerce me to say something that would indicate my guilt, even if I'm red-handed guilty. You can't do it. It's just another bubble. It's another layer of protection around the individual. And the state position in America is summed up by the expression on the face of that Attorney General. What color is this pen? On the advice of my attorney, I respectfully... And the guy just turns around. Okay, great. What he's doing is he's turning around and he's going, okay, so look, we can't get him this way. We have to get him another way. And that means we're going to have to get evidence. And that means we're going to have to corroborate the evidence. And that means we're going to have to convince 12 people that beyond a reasonable doubt, this guy did it. And that is so built into our culture that we don't even think about it. I never really thought about the Fifth Amendment in that way before. I always thought, yeah, it's cool that you don't have to testify against yourself. But I never really thought about why. It's not just so they can't beat it out of you. It's also because, again, it's an imperfect world. And the presumption of innocence is great. If you've ever been accused of something you didn't do, then the presumption of innocence is a lovely thing to have. And when I was writing about Yezhov and all of the Russian Cheka leaders and direct quotes from Trotsky and Lenin, not to mention Stalin and all the rest of them, where they basically say, better to kill 9 innocent people than let a spy go free. I mean, they say this openly. Better to kill 10 innocent people than let a guilty person go free. Wow. Needless to say, in this country, we believe that it's better to let 10 guilty people go free than to have an innocent person put in jail. It's just a different way of looking at things. It's the whole difference between, in fact, you can put it right there. That's the difference between individualists and collectivists, is the presumption of innocence right there. It's like, you're going to let a lot of criminals go that way if you can't prove they did it. That's true. That's absolutely right. And I can think of one of them. And I mentioned it to Natasha, who wasn't here for this goat rodeo, but there's no question that O.J. Simpson was guilty. Once they found blood on his gloves and on his shoes, and blood in a car of the victims, it's over. Of course he's guilty. Of course he is. But he had the presumption of innocence, and the prosecution botched that case so terribly that he walked. And I remember thinking, this is a terrible, terrible injustice. And it was. It was a terrible injustice. And at the same time, I remember saying to myself, but this is the price. This is the price we pay. This is the cost of the presumption of innocence. Watching this murderer walk out of this room with a big smile on his face and go looking for the real killers on golf courses all around the country. And I remember clearly thinking, this is what it costs. It's not free. Nothing's free. You have to pay for everything, and that's how we pay for this. But that's a price I'd much rather pay. I'd much rather watch O.J. Simpson walk out of a courtroom smugly smiling than to hear that 10 innocent people were arrested and shot in order to catch a spy, and none of them were guilty. Or even if one of the 10 were guilty. That's repugnant. And it's just a different way of looking at things. It's so fundamental, it's almost impossible to imagine what kind of a person you'd have to be to look at it. Better to kill 10 innocent people than let a guilty one go away. But in any event, Dave Big Booty says even black people now admit that OJ did it. Yes, they admit it now, and they knew it at the time. Now, for them, it was a different thing. It wasn't a question of OJ's guilt. That's not what was on trial there. White America saw the trial of this individual. Black America said, are we going to have to lose every single case ever? And just the fact that they got off, that he walked, was just so astonishing to many of them. And I cannot remember if that happened. It must have happened after the Rodney King thing. They're both in the mid-'90s. I'm almost positive it happened after Rodney King. I want to say it was probably around 97, 98, 90, somewhere in there for OJ. And then Rodney King was a little earlier. In any event, after Rodney King, the black community was thinking, oh, okay, so we have videotapes of these cops just beating this guy practically to death, not guilty. That was certainly, a big part of it, I think. I think that's going to do it for this edition of the Stratosphere Lounge. Off to a lurching start, but you never really know. Back in the saddle again, I suppose. I have a great deal of stuff to do. I'm recording episodes 7 and 8 tomorrow. Oh, by the way, I talked to these guys. I don't want to reveal too much of this, obviously, but I'd finished episode 8, and I realized, okay, 8 is finished. I have 10 episodes. I'm 80% through my available time, and I am in 1963. Do we want to do 80% of the show between 1948 and 1963, and then cover 1963 to 1991 in half an hour? And the jury's still out on this one. But it's beginning to look like, if the numbers are good enough, people listen to the podcast, and I suspect they will, because we did real well with the Apollo thing on the podcast end. I think what we'll end up doing is this will be the Cold War Part 1. The whole thing will be a 20-part episode. It's 43 years of history. And I thought, man, how am I going to get through this? I mean, I'm not going to have anything to write about. I was just cranking out these words. I've put 120,000 words written so far in 8 episodes of the 10 on the Cold War. And since a firewall generally runs about 1,200 episodes, 1,200 words, that's 100 firewalls. So I'd like to get paid for this, and then if I get paid for this, we keep the lights on, and then we'll write some more firewalls. I am going to write a firewall. I know if Scott's watching this, he's already beginning to shake his fist and throw things. No, 100. Did I say 1,200 episodes? It's 1,200. It's 100 firewalls. Sorry. I don't know if it'll be released as a book. I don't own the rights to it, but I would like to think so. I'd like to see the Apollo thing released. But in any event, I will tell you what I am going to write about, and that is I'm going to write about the catastrophe that's going to be the rise of Skywalker. And I think most of us already know what that movie's going to be like. I'm going to go on opening night, even though I don't want to give them any money, because I think most people are going to be boycotting it. I really do want to be there when the fans are there. I think a lot of people are going to be booing, and rightfully so. But what I'm going to write about is this. This was the last piece of the puzzle I hadn't really understood coming off The Last Jedi. I'll just give it to you real quick. So Last Jedi destroyed Luke Skywalker. Force Awakens basically took Han Solo and just threw him out the window, just killed him for no reason whatsoever. Boom. And by the way, I've mentioned this 100 times. I've never really quite got it so clearly. I've said many times that Rey could fly the Millennium Falcon better than Han Solo, and she could use the lightsaber better than Luke Skywalker. And I realized that's right. She does things that it took 2 white male heroes to do. She does it all. We're not going to get into that. But at the end of this movie, which looks to be like the biggest goat rodeo of all time, It's not going to be better than I suspect, Eric. It's going to be a flaming wreckage catastrophe. Flaming wreckage. The fact that the Emperor is back means it's doomed. I wasn't really killed when I fell into that bottomless pit of the Death Star, which exploded a few moments later. I wasn't really killed. Well, then nobody's really killed. So we're going to kill you in this episode? It doesn't mean anything. We're going to cut you in half, and they're going to dice you up into little pieces? It doesn't matter. If you're not dead when you fell down the pit of the Death Star, and the Death Star blew up, Death Star 2 in Return of the Jedi, if you didn't get killed then the death doesn't mean anything. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. So anyway, I want to go so I can hear people booing. But I knew that they were destroying Luke, and I knew they were destroying Han. I knew they were destroying all of the stuff, and I knew they were putting a female in his place. But what I didn't realize was that at the end of this movie, spoiler alert, as if it's going to be a spoiler alert. I mean, if you haven't heard this, then it's not like people are going to care because this movie's just garbage. But this is widely discussed. The very last scene is somebody comes up to Rey and says, "What's your family name?" And she says, "My name is Rey Skywalker." Da-dun, da-da, dun, 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 dun. And so the tradition continues. What's happened there is that they have not. First, they had to clear out Luke. They had to clear out Luke and Han. You had to get that mythology out of there. You had to make them a grumpy old guy who gets in an argument with his emo son and gets killed over nothing. Kind of a grumpy, cranky, lonely guy who met the love of his life, and they probably stayed married for a year or two before the inevitable divorce and all the rest of it. So that's number one. And then Luke Skywalker, who's the greatest optimist in the history of the galaxy, he becomes a cranky old man, murderer, attempted murderer. Who doesn't give a damn about anything, and so on. So he's destroyed. And then the part I didn't realize is that when she says, "My name is Skywalker," I know where they're trying to go with this, and I know what people think they're trying to say. We're carrying on the tradition, it's a new generation of Skywalkers. But that's not what it's about. She is Luke Skywalker. You understand? This is it. It's not like, I'll see the movie first, but it's not like she's the follow-up to Luke Skywalker. She is Luke Skywalker. The person you and I thought was Luke Skywalker? No, that guy was a milk-drinking, bitter old man. No, the person who you remember blowing up the Death Star in a fighter plane was Rey. And the person you remember flying the Millennium Falcon through all of those incredible maneuvers was Rey Skywalker. I think your memory must be a little defective. That's what it's all about. It's absolutely, precisely 1984, communist China, communist Russia, rewriting of history. And they're going to take the hit now, but in 15 years, 10 years, 20 years, they're going to know that nobody's going to watch the first movie, and they're going to know that the whole Skywalker thing that your grandparents were talking about is obviously about this woman named Rey, and this multicultural crew of people getting together and singing "Up with Everything," and it's just, it is the most compelling example of what they do. And the one nice thing about this whole thing is that Star Wars fans and video game fans, now millennials mostly, have had the incredibly great experience of being called racists because they complained about a structural element in the story. So now they know what it's like to be called racist when they're not racist. Now they know what it's like to be called misogynist when they're not. Now they know what it's like to have the race card played on them, and they don't like it much. But anyway, that's that. All right, so I'm going to get on out of here. Thanks again for our support from our members at BillWhittle.com. Make this whole thing possible. And we have started to become a little more aware of our Patreon viewers, which turns out we had a few, and we didn't even know that we're there. It's like a lost colony. And I felt very bad about that. If you happen to be one of those people, we're doing Patreon-only content of about 6-7 minutes a week, something like that. So that is that. And I suspect I will be back next week. And if I'm not, I'll have a damn good excuse for it. All right, that'll do it. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks again for the members of making this possible, and we'll see you next time right here on the Stratosphere Lounge.